I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar, 10 Translation and Localization Lessons Learned from Hollywood. We have a good group of panelists today. I'm excited about this topic. And so we're really looking forward to this conversation, and we appreciate the gift of your time as you join us. We'll cover a few housekeeping things right at the beginning. Number one on Q&A, when you have a question, I know that there's an option for chat. Please put any questions or comments that you have in the Q&A box. Secondly, a recording will be available. It'll be sent to you in the next day or so, and we encourage you, if it's useful to you, to share it with other people. And finally, in the spirit of us improving as we do these webinars, we would encourage you to complete the evaluation. So at the end of the webinar, you'll get an evaluation. We'll actually email that to you. And we hope that you will give us honest and constructive and encouraging feedback. I want to begin just by talking a little bit about Ingenuiti, our company. Our mission and our purpose for existing is that we're dedicated to delivering measurably better solutions that bridge training and cultural gaps, and those solutions enable our clients to thrive in an interconnected world. We provide three services. The very first is custom learning design. So we create custom learning solutions for companies all around the world, big and small. Most of our clients are large companies. Many of them are multinationals, and so we get involved in all sorts of interesting learning projects. The second service that we provide is staff augmentation. Our staff aug is focused primarily around learning, and so we have an enormous list, about 1,500 instructional design experts and people in graphic design, people who have worked all over the world on learning and developing learning experiences. And then the third, and it's really our topic for today, which is translation and localization. So very often the projects that we do involve at least one, or at least two rather, of these services. So very often we are both creating the custom learning and we are doing the translation and localization. And I believe that we are the only company in existence that does both of those. And so it's a fun and exciting place to be, and it's a great team to be part of. I want to introduce our panelists. My name is Jerry Zastra. I'm the Senior Director of Learning at Ingenuiti. I've been in the learning and development space for 30 plus years, and it looks like I'm looking at everybody else's number of years. So I've been at this the longest, which makes me the oldest, for whatever that's worth. Sarah, you just don't even have to be mean about that. So, and then Adam, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Adam Ealing. I'm the Vice President of Client Services. Really been working in the space for about 15 years. Got started partnering with companies like Skillsoft and Element K back when online training content was pretty much all driven through the library content system. So we helped those organizations to globalize their content. That's kind of how I got into the space, and since then really now just focused on ensuring that our customers and clients are onboarded and that they're finding the solutions they need for their current challenges.
Thank you, Adam. Sarah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Vlahovic. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Ingenuiti. I have been in the industry for 20 plus years, starting out in the very embryonic stages when we were still trying to figure out what a dongle was in some instances. So I've been here for quite a few years and have a lot of localization experience, and I'm very excited to lend my expertise in this webinar.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of changes over the last 20
A
years,
lot.
particularly in technology and how we even think about translation and localization. So we're glad to have you today, Sarah. And then Aveen.
Yep. Hello, everyone. So my name is Aveen Jamadagni, and I'm the production manager. I've been working with Ingenuiti for 10 plus years, and I oversee our production teams, which consists of localization engineers, DTP specialists, video editors, e-learning programmers, and QA. more than 10 years. So when I started, they were like Flash-based courses, and now we have evolved more from there. So I've also seen a lot of changes in the localization, especially for e-learning.
We've gotten a little better, huh, Veen?
Yeah, much better.
For sure, for
He's
sure.
seen a lot of change too.
Yeah, for sure. Even the last year has been a crazy amount of change. Well, we want to start by level setting, and thank you again to all of you for joining today in this webinar. The distinction between translation and localization. It's a distinction that is sometimes not clear to people. I have heard people refer to translation when they mean localization, localization when they mean translation. So, Sarah, level set for us here. How do these two terms relate to one another?
Happy to. Translation is really the conversion of the written word from one language to another in the most simplistic form. Localization is the adaptation of those translated words to align better with the cultural, or specifically the local meaning.
So it can be something is accurately translated and makes absolutely no sense to the audience because
That is
it's not
correct.
localized.
That is correct. And localized, I shouldn't say localized can have different meanings. The audience can be different for each purpose. For example, in the learning industry, what may be translated, the same sentence could have a completely different meaning for the e-learning industry versus the medical device industry, depending on who their user is and what the intention of that is.
Yeah, so it's really, localization is really considering the entire person, not just accurate translation, but that person's background, that person's culture, that person's location on the planet, that person's language set. So there's a lot. Would you say, Sarah and Aveen, jump in here too? Would you say localization is more complex than translation?
Absolutely. And I think, Aveen, you could speak to that, because India has so many diverse languages and dialects that people have to localize to accommodate, correct?
Yeah, I think so. It's important to, not just look at the translation itself, but look at the cultural nuances. So you have to make sure that, it's it will be accepted in that culture, like units, conversions of units, and, things like those all need to be accounted for when you're, localizing a product.
Which leads us straight to Hollywood. We want to get to the fun stuff first. So we're going to talk about why Hollywood cares about localization. The way filmmakers used to do this, and again, I have a little background in this. More than 10 years ago, I produced a movie that ended up in some theaters and a few pilot programs for television. The way Hollywood used to localize was subtitles, right? You put in subtitles, and many of us have watched movies with subtitles. Sometimes things make sense, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they feel familiar, sometimes they don't feel familiar at all. Hollywood has been really, really intentional about localization, and for good reason. For those of you in the United States, it might be that you think most of the movies that you've seen, most of the tentpole movies or big blockbuster type of movies, are primarily doing business in the United States. But here's the reality of it. The United States and Canada only account for about 13% of global box office. So only 13% of all the tickets sold in the world are actually in the United States. The other 87% are sold outside the United States and the Canadian market. China has seen an enormous rise in its box office. The box office of China in dollars, just in terms of financial performance, rivals that of the United States, and I believe this year is exceeding that of the United States. The last 3 years, it's been either number one or number two. The U.S. and the Chinese market have been close to one another, and so we put up. We've just got some films that'll be familiar to you. Avengers Endgame. Many of you have seen that. fascinating movie, and incredible effects, compelling story. Lion King, which is a powerful movie, and then of course Frozen 2, which is more my granddaughter's speed than mine. But just thinking about those three movies, so think about Avengers Endgame, Lion King, and Frozen 2. 30% of those tickets were sold in the US market, and the other 70% were sold in non-US markets. And as Hollywood has realized this, particularly the United States film base has figured out that they need to localize. They need, if they're going to play in global markets, they need to localize to those global markets. And of course, it's not just Hollywood. I mean, Aveen, your background, Bollywood is it produces an enormous amount of a number of films and
Yeah.
compelling stories.
Yeah, I think so. They're like, like Bollywood is, I think, so one of the largest producer of films. And I think so they've also started collaborating with international talents to make it more, like diverse, their casts. And also, they're moving towards more universal themes, which, is to cater for the global audience.
So let's talk about how Hollywood does this. It's gone far beyond just subtitles. The very first movie we're going to talk about is the one in the middle frame there. It's the movie Inside Out. So 42% of its revenue was generated in the US and 58% was generated outside the US. They were highly, highly intentional about this. One of the directors, his last name is Doctor, he said that we learned that some of the content that we wanted, and of course they did test audiences, but he said some of the content that we wanted in the film made absolutely no sense to people outside the United States. There were references in there, some of the scenes, and so they ended up, and this is a lot, they ended up making 28 changes in the movie. So if you would go to Mumbai, or if you would go to Germany, or if you would go to Tokyo, you would see a different version of the movie Inside Out. I know in the movie that I was part of, we had to make an international version of it, and we had to cut 28 minutes out of it, which is a substantial cut. And so there are two very, very different films. The results were excellent, given that 42% of the box office was in the U.S., but 58% was international. The film on the right, some of you will recognize, is Iron Man 3. And they did something fascinating. If you watch the Chinese version of Iron Man 3, you'll find that there are 4 extra minutes in the film. They added Chinese characters. They added a little bit of Chinese stories. And they also did kind of an interesting thing. They had a unique product placement. A Chinese product, a Chinese dairy product, was added into the film, and it was successful. It caught on with international audiences. 2/3 of the box office was from international sales. The one on the left is Lincoln. I would assume many of you have seen it. It's a Daniel Day-Lewis and Steven Spielberg movie. One of my favorites, a powerful, powerful story. Not on the whole life of Lincoln, but just at the end, as he's trying to get through the 13th Amendment into the Constitution of the United States. It's a fascinating story, but it's a distinctly American story. And so, the distributors are thinking, well, how is this going to play? I mean, they did some surveys of people outside the United States, and most of them knew that Abraham Lincoln was a president of the United States. They knew not much else. Maybe a little bit of, he might have been the guy who ended slavery, but little on the Civil War, little on his background. And so if you would go to a non-US nation and you watch the movie Lincoln, you would see that there's an intro, a several minute long intro before the credits even start, before the movie even starts. And it's Steven Spielberg, and he gives a little history lesson. He tells the story of who Abraham Lincoln is so that he sort of focuses the mind of the theater goers and helps them understand what they're about to watch and observe. And so it's fascinating. I just open it up to the panel. Any comments? I'm sure all of you have seen all three of these movies. I like them all. Inside Out, I think, is a really I know it's a kids movie. It's an animation, but it really delves into the human psyche. It's an interesting movie.
Yeah, they have Inside Out 2 being produced right now. So you can see it was successful, certainly here and abroad. I think it's just interesting when as we're about to dive into these other elements, just thinking about this from, again, the learning perspective. There's this intentionality, there's this focus on how we're going to engage that audience, right? So Hollywood's doing it because they want a better return on investment, but in the learning space, it's more about return on the investment of learning. What does it look like for engagement? What does it look like for application? All those things. I know we'll touch on what that looks like as we go forward, but it's a great framework just to start here and see that people are doing this from an investment standpoint and they're seeing the benefit. And what is that going to look like from a training perspective as well?
And it's not easy. I mean, Hollywood spends a great deal of time and a great deal of money figuring out how to do this and reshooting scenes and adding in scenes. I mean, those things are not inexpensive to do, certainly. But they found out that it connects better, and people are voting, obviously, with their dollars. Every single movie is voted on in a pretty profound and measurable way. That level of intensity of thinking through how to connect with an audience. So if you are somebody who is releasing learning into a global setting, and truthfully, it doesn't even have to be global anymore, given the diversity of the United States, the number of languages, even if you're doing US-based training, thinking about your learners, thinking about how to connect with them, how to enter their experience, how to understand what they do and what they don't do in their worlds. That's a powerful thing. Aveen or Sarah, anything to add?
I think the importance of especially movies like Inside Out, where they intentionally develop their content in a simplistic form to ensure that it is reachable to all audiences, something that we'll obviously delve deeper into, but helps get that, and in the case of Inside Out, that learning message across. And that's a key objective that we're trying to do in the e-learning sphere, is make sure that the messages are always brought to the forefront. And sometimes simplicity and intentionality are the best ways to get there.
Yeah, they really have put forward the idea of audience-centric. For us, it would be learner-centric development. And so we're going to spend the rest of the webinar thinking through how they do that and looking at some of the lessons that they've learned. So the very first one is, it's a word that's come up a couple of times, intentionality. And this is from Khalib Pinkett. Khalib is the producer of Cobra Kai. Some of you have seen that. Annie. He's been part of Men in Black 3, the third edition, in After Earth. And his line really struck me. You have to start taking in other cultures and things that they value and how they view the world and incorporate that into your storytelling. What Mr. Pinkett is saying here is that this is not at the end of the process. Localization, and we would argue translation as well, is something you need to be cognizant of at the very beginning. Even when you're framing up the kind of learning objectives that you're going to have, or you're thinking through what formats, how you're going to deliver them, that kind of intentionality is key to this. And we've seen that over and over. A lot of times, learning leaders will focus on the objectives and focus on the creation, instructional design and graphic design and all the rest of it. And then localization is like the last step, or the penultimate step, right? Second to last. What Hollywood does is it thinks through this at the beginning. It chooses its characters, it chooses its scenes, it chooses the kind of story it's going to tell, it chooses the format in which the movie is going to be shot. It might be animation, it might be something else. It makes all of those choices early. And localization is part of every single choice that they make, rather than thinking, that's something at the end we'll throw some subtitles on and hope people figure it out. That's sort of the old way of doing that. Adam, talk a little bit about that, if you would, about localization in the learning process at every stage of development.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think intentionality it really kind of just ties in with when we're looking at a learning program and that upfront analysis. So where is this training going to be deployed? Who are the people that are going to need to be impacted by that training? So, when we're going through a project or working with a client on it, we're going to find that out up front so we can understand what versions do we need to take into account, what cultures do we need to take into account, what areas of the courses might need to be adjusted. If you look at those elements at the very end, one, you're either going to really impact your timeline from a negative standpoint, or two, you're not probably going to have the budget to account for the intentional training that you'd want. So you're not going to engage that audience, or you're not going to go through it with it, right? You might just, again, put on the subtitles as Jerry noted. So it might be better than not having it in language, but it's certainly not going to have the impact that it would if it was designed specifically for important audiences as you're releasing that content.
A lot of you, thank you, Adam. A lot of you work in the ADDIE model, so sort of analysis, and then that design phase, of development, implementation, and evaluation. There are people that have different, SAM model. There's lots of different models for how to do this, but the idea is that at the bottom of every spreadsheet in each one of those phases, you have a section that is thinking intentionally about localization and translation too, right? I mean, if you know something's going to be translated, you just write it differently. You write the script differently. You think about the images differently if you're really anticipating a broad audience where you need some localization factors. So intentionality is the very first one.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, like, when you're considering for different like localization, or, you have to consider like, language expansion as well. So, when you're developing the content, you want to make sure that your content is gonna, once it gets translated, is gonna be fitting in the course itself. So, audio expansion, text expansions also need to be looked into, along with intentionality.
And it's not just expansion. Some languages are shorter too, right?
Yeah. Yes. So Asian languages might become shorter.
Yeah. And then you think about, okay, you make choices about how much on-screen text do you really want?
Mm-hmm.
If you have, and Aveen, I know you've been through this, Sarah, you have too, where there's a course that's created and there's a heavy amount of on-screen text. And it turns out that's created a nightmare that people didn't even think about when they were contemplating on how this was going to look and how it was going to feel. They've created a mess for later on when they're trying to translate and localize. Well, good. Well, let's move on. The next one, again, I think all of these. This statement is from the BBC on globalization in films. The increased importance of the international marketplace is also affecting casting. So I know when we casted the movie that I was part of, we brought in 2 Academy Award winners. Ernest Borgnine was one of them. We chose him because he appeals to a particular audience. The other one was a woman named Louise Fletcher, who was a really nice lady. Not at all what most people think about, because this was Louise played Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and if you've ever seen that movie, she's pretty terrifying character. She's way nicer in real person. So was Mr. Borgnine. He was just a kind man. But you are choosing casting based on the audiences, you want people to see themselves in the movie. And so actors, according to the BBC, are chosen according to whether or not they will resonate with audiences and target markets. It means you know what your target markets are, and then you start to create a cast that looks like the people in those markets. So I just want to open that up to comments from the panel, and see what you think.
I completely agree with you, Jerry. It's really important to focus on the diversity of not just your audience, but also your characters and what message they're communicating to your audience. And by selecting diverse groups of people or diverse types of people, and being mindful of the fact that those diverse people may even dress differently than we do, it will lend or lean into our favor as e-learning developers when we ensure that what we are sharing with our audience is relatable to our audience.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
think-
know in another organization that I was part of, we had an animator from Eastern Europe. A fantastic animator. The guy was incredibly talented. But what's the nice way to say this? Every single character he created looked like some version of me, right? He just created white guys. We'd say to him, "You just this thing is going to go global. It just can't be that." And he's really struggled. It took us a half a dozen animations with him before he sort of caught on to the message that you 100% can't do that because people don't see themselves in it.
Yeah, the good thing is nowadays, like authoring tools have they provide a diverse library of illustrated and photographic characters that you can use in your courses. And, just using them, like you guys said, it allows the broader audience to see themselves represented in the course. So, I think that definitely helps.
And adding to that, Aveen, the use of avatars is a huge way to sort of mitigate the character selection, because in selecting these different avatars or these different characters like they did in Inside Out, for example, and circling back to that, it just makes the concepts more relatable versus the characters.
And the diversity can come through in voices. It can come through in images. It can also come through in names. Recently, we have a project that we're looking at where it's basically remaking some content that was about 15 years old. And it's a global company. It's a very diverse company. And everyone in the video was named like Alice, Steve, Mike, Pete. There was no diversity in images. There was no diversity in voices there, and there wasn't even diversity in names. And so we had to go back to the company and say, look, you're just not seeing it. We need to upskill and update and be more reflective, because you're going to release this training material globally, and it needs to reflect your audiences and a global learner audience. And so they recognized it right away once we pointed it out, but they didn't see it initially. So there's some things that sneak in sometimes that you're not really aware of. One of the best ways to check is to ask a diverse audience, does this feel like it was made for you? Do you feel like you see yourself in here? And so yeah, that's very, very first one. And the third one kind of connects to it a little bit too. It's not just diversity of people, but it's global scenery. Some films that have done a phenomenal job of this. If any of you are fans of the Bond movies, the Bond movies have not just one of them or the last one of them, but all of them have been shot in more than 600 locations. No Time to Die, the most recent one. I won't tell you how it ends, but well, anyway, if you haven't seen it, but it was shot in six different nations, which think about that. Think about having film crew, right? Think about having, all of the people that it takes to film in a location. I know on the film I was part of at one point, we had 200 people on set. in one place. This isn't just different locations in the same city. These are 6 different nations. They are very intentional about doing that. Bond has been very intentional. Mission Impossible too. Rogue Nation, the fairly recent one. 8 different nations, and you see it. It's beautiful. And when we do that in learning, when we use backgrounds or we use, we don't do many establishing shots. Like, we don't show Marrakesh and then put people in that in our learning typically. But we can do it in different office spaces. We can do different exterior building shots to show the location that might be in India or the location that might be in China. It shows variety and it at least fits the content. So panelists, jump in here with thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think like even workstation type setups, you noted, Jerry, what does it look like for people in their work in their work situations? Our offices in the States might look different than an office where 30, 40, 50% of people aren't working from home or have the option to work from home, right? Things like that can be really different in your overseas locations. And so I think for us to be able to develop training content that aligns with what they're seeing allows them to understand how they're engaging with the content and that it is for them and not just for somebody else. It's not something just to click through. So I think that's a really good call out. It might not be the Marrakesh market, as you noted, but certainly and the working locations and how people's desks are set up and all those things are much different around the world than they are in the United States. I know, in our office in the Philippines, for instance, there's a specific setup and even regulations around how close desks can be and such. And so it's a much more community focused culture overall. So people actually work much closer together. If somebody was taken from the United States and had to work there remotely, it would be a big change for them because the personal space, you'd feel like maybe claustrophobic. You'd certainly feel like you don't have as much quiet space as we do, even in cubicles in the United States. So things like that are certainly different as you go around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting, Adam, when films are made, how much attention there is nothing in the shot that isn't intentionally there. So I remember we filmed in a home, and the home was nice. It was a nicely appointed home. And the director came in, stripped out everything in the house and remade it all because he wanted a different feel. And it's the stuff in the background, right? He's trying to engage the audience's brains with just different things that communicate or consistent with the story that he was trying to tell. And so it's amazing. You've never seen a film where they just shot whatever happened to be there. Again, we're a bit back to intentionality, but if you have global learners, do everything you can to make those global learners feel perfectly at home or recognize it. In our initial conversation, I forget, I think, Adam, maybe you brought it up. What does a fire extinguisher look like outside the United States? Are they all the same? Right? Even small things like that will make a difference.
Yeah, like even like shop floors, like, our shop floor is going to look different between, different countries. So if you're trying to, learn and teach them something, you want to make sure that they can relate to those images.
Yeah, for sure. And diving a little bit deeper into that, lesson 4 is colors and symbols. So films released to an international audience will pay careful attention to the color schemes, to the backgrounds, to the symbols specifically, used to cater to a variety of different audiences. And then this is sort of an open question: do the symbols and colors you use carry the same meaning in all audiences? And I think we would say they 100% do not. Aveen, I'm going to ask you to jump in there, and Adam too, if you have some thoughts. I know you do.
Yeah, I think definitely like colors, like colors can have like different cultural meanings. For example, the color red, I think so in Western culture that, it symbolizes danger or love. In China, it would be associated with good luck and prosperity. And in India, it's considered auspicious because brides do normally wear like a red colored attire, during weddings. So,
Hmm.
you just have to colors, colors have different meanings. One thing also you want to be careful is accessibility. I would say color accessibility. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right colors, considering individuals with visual impairment. Ensure that there's sufficient color contrast between your text and your backgrounds to make sure that people are able to read properly the content. And also another thing with colors would be if you want to maintain it as close as possible to your brand colors, to reinforce your brand identity. So you can use colors in different ways to in your content.
Yeah. Yeah, Adam and I have talked about the color red a few times, and it means very, very different things in different cultures, and you might not even be aware of it unless you're intentional about it.
Yeah, and symbols, things like thumbs up, so as you're designing your UX, UI, UX, how you approve things, those types of elements, thumbs up isn't always a positive in some cultures. So those are things certainly to take into account. You can engage with a focus group or a team member in country, verify those elements and change those as well.
Yeah, thank you. The fifth one is again right at the start. This is again from the BBC report, but very talky comedies don't tend to translate. The humor is particularly American oftentimes, and it doesn't play well in Asia or other parts of Europe. There are many examples of this of both television shows and films where people don't get it. They don't understand. And the moment that you don't understand, you'll seek your mind will naturally seek to understand for a little bit, and then people just check out. So Sarah, jump in.
I often think of the Woody Allen example in this case, because a lot of people, even outside of the New York area,
Yeah, I was going to say,
have
I grew up in Indiana. I still don't understand Woody Allen movies.
So exactly, it's a very specific dialogue for a very specific section of the world that doesn't translate, let alone localize well in many other countries. And so it is really important. And I go back again to the Inside Out example. With careful scripting and careful, thoughtful intentionality, the content is relatable to the audience. But in an example like Woody Allen, it's not relatable to the audience because it's again for a very specific audience.
Sarah, are you going to admit that you're from New York, or do I have to point it out?
I will wear it on my
On your
shoulder,
sleeve?
on my
Okay.
sleeve.
Okay, good.
I am
Good.
a New Yorker in and out.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And certain television shows are the very same way. Aveen, I know you've
Yeah.
had some interesting experiences with the television show Friends.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I used to love Friends when I was back in India, and I used to watch it. I watched it, the whole series. But when I came over here and I rewatched it, I understood a lot more. I think so. It made understanding
You caught
the
the
culture
jokes,
over here, like even Thanksgiving, which is celebrated over here. Some of those jokes you may not be able to get when you're watching it, when it's an international audience watching it. So
right?
what's coming over here staying, you get those small jokes, but I think so when you're trying to cater to a broader audience, maybe, try to keep it high level.
Yeah. Yeah. So right away at the very beginning, as you're building a script, as you're thinking about what you want to communicate in your learning experience, references to things like baseball. Or there we go, Sarah. Are you a Mets or a Yankees person?
I'm a Milwaukee Brewers girl.
You're a brewer. Okay, I don't even want to know the background of that. But right, I mean, okay, so no one, no, your international audience is not going to know who the Milwaukee Brewers are, other than perhaps they are really, really good at making beer. That's the only thing that they're going to come up with there. So, that this is part of being intentional through the whole process, just really thinking through what you're going to say and how you're going to say it.
Hmm.
And that sort of ties into the next one, which is simplicity, right? Complex storylines tend to be confusing to international audiences who might not understand the nuances and subtleties of a complex story, because many of the references will be unfamiliar to them. For this reason, action movies tend to perform better at the box office because they're crafted mainly to give you that visceral experience as opposed to an intellectual experience or response. So, Aveen, someday you can explain this to me. I spent quite a bit of my life, about 20 years ago, traveling internationally. So I was all over the world, and I tried like crazy to understand Australian rules football and cricket. I watched the games. I listened to the news report. I'd watch sports on the news, and I have absolutely to this day no idea how cricket works, which is a shame. And I would love to know, but I don't, and no one bothered to explain it to me. It
Uh,
appears to me to be fairly complex.
that is how American football was for me when I came here. I
Yeah,
was like, I just knew like Super Bowl was a big thing, but besides that, I didn't know much about it. So I started watching, and then now I love it. But yeah, it was
yeah. I
completely new for me.
The guy that I worked with years ago was from New Zealand, and he was used to Australian rules, and so I had a Super Bowl party, and I invited him over, and he just was like staring, with like a dog that hears a high noise, right, a high pitch. He had no idea what was going on. At the end, he said, "This is kind of boring." He said, compared to Australian rules football, I mean, they stop, there's huddles, they talk, he had no idea what was happening. Sarah, I know that you are dying to talk about SpongeBob.
I loved SpongeBob when I watched it in English with my daughter, and I think that, was wildly successful because SpongeBob at his very fiber was kind
Mm.
and communicated that kindness message throughout his show in a very simplistic way. And I was genuinely surprised when I was visiting Serbia with our then 4-year-old daughter and was watching SpongeBob with her, who had no Serbian background, but still wanted to watch it. And me, who had the Serbian background, was really impressed to see how well it was translatable,
Mhm.
localizable for the audience, because the English at its core was simple. And they were able to communicate that into other languages for other audiences. And again, make it wildly successful because of that.
Yeah, and I think, moving that into the world of learning, watch for complexity.
Hmm.
Um, we want to make sure that you don't have to have any pre-knowledge to truly understand what the learning experience is attempting to teach you. But giving it's one of the reasons why micro learning, I think, works pretty well.
Hmm.
It tends to be bite-sized. It tends to be what you need when you need it. It doesn't provide the entire full history of engineering in this particular piece or part, or all the leadership theories, but it tells you what you need to know when you need to know it. And that simply communicated is really successful with learning audiences. Um, and a lot of times you can give people additional learning opportunities. You want to dive deeper, right? You want to know more, click here. Great. But that simple story, simple narrative, simple lesson thing that you're trying to communicate and to teach, that really has powerful impact. And it kind of connects to our next one, which is visual, right? Yeah, I don't know. You guys recognize this movie? Is this one of the what's the movie here?
Fast and Furious.
I saw the first one. I realized immediately it wasn't for me, and I've never seen. Aveen, are you a Fast and Furious guy?
For the first, yes, but then there were like too many of them, and then I stopped watching.
So you stuck with them for a little
Yeah.
while, but I think there's
Yeah.
like 10 of them now. But
Yeah.
successful international movies, according to Vox, it tend to be heavy on spectacle, action, things moving, light and story, right? Not heavy on the narrative side, but things are moving around. And it isn't because foreign audiences prefer bad storytelling. It's just that the visual spectacle translates better across languages, across cultures, and it does so better than plot. It does so better than being dependent on, really complex dialogue. And if there are some shared cultural ideas going on, I think this is one of the reasons, and we're going to talk about animations in a little bit, but one of the reasons why animations work so well is because you can have multiple things going on. We created a learning experience recently for a large company in the EU, and there are multiple things going on at the same time. There were characters in the foreground that are talking. There are characters in the background. This was all done by animation. But when we were proposing this idea, the client said, "Well, oof, is that too complex?" I said, "Well, watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whatever news. There's people talking, there's things running on the bottom, a lot of times on one side of the screen and sometimes on both sides of the screen. There's information coming at you, and it's highly visual. And it's really meant to be that, so that lots of things are moving and changing, so that we engage, and we like that part.
Yeah.
Sarah or Adam, or Aveen, jump in here.
Yeah, just like same with our courses, like, we don't want to have a lot of content that the user has to read on screen. We would rather keep it, minimum content, more visual, that way they can easily grasp the content.
Yeah, it's a matter of seconds before we get bored.
Mhm.
Yeah, focus on the application. What's supposed to be done here and why is very, very helpful.
Yeah, and if I think it's one of the attractive elements of augmented and virtual reality too, because in both you can move what you look at. You're not just staring at a stagnant screen where things are moving every 8 to 12 seconds. You can actually look around, and you can enter into that experience. It is more visceral. You react to it, and I think that's one of the beauties of highly visual learning, and it makes a good argument for AR and VR. All right, so let's jump into animation. Some incredible things here. Many of the top performing movies around the world are animations. We tend to think of them as kid stories, right? But they're way more than that. So, Frozen, The Incredibles, one of my favorites, Despicable Me, Shrek, Finding Nemo. These are just some fantastic Ice Age, some fantastic animations, and they have been successful. And just a few years ago, 2 of the 3 top grossing movies in the world were animations. And I think one of the very first things that was attractive about animations is the voiceover was really easy, right? You could do any language you want. You just do the voiceover, and then it's better. But it's not just that, it's more than that. So let's talk about that a little bit, panel. Why are animations this successful?
Well, as you mentioned, it's the use of voiceovers, but it's also the use of, in many instances, I'll use the word avatar loosely, but the use of characters that don't look human and normalizing them in order, again, to circle back and intentionally create the message that they're trying to communicate.
Yeah, animals work really well. Creatures work really well. People connect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And like you said, voiceovers, I've seen like a lot of these movies being released internationally with local actors voicing them. So, you get to connect to the characters as well. So like if there's a negative character and you like in Bollywood, if there's a negative, like an actor who's famous for like, a negative role, you could use his voice
Being
and,
the bad
you
guy.
could, yeah, you could relate to
Mhm.
the characters, so there's ways to work with, with animations in that aspect. And then, I mean, most of the stories are simple. I mean, you can relate to them. They're not specifically related to a certain part. They're globally, or like, they have like they're acceptable all over the world. So I think so it makes it easier for the users to connect.
Yeah, and it's bringing together everything, right? It's visual, it's simple, the stories are compelling, and the other thing, it's way easier to edit an animation than it is.
Mm.
You have to create it, but to make changes in it is far easier than reshooting. A lot of times with clients that we're talking to about that want to do video, we'll nudge them. Some people choose that, but we'll nudge them toward animation simply because you can make changes. You just finished shooting this thing and the procedure changes. Step 3 is something different now. How do you go back and fix that? And over time, hairstyles come and go, clothing styles come and go. It's not just process changes. So Adam, you were gonna.
It's in the other things easier to localize, right? I mean, what we just said, you're just replacing narration or characters. I mean, I think, remember back when they did an Academy Awards, I think is when this popped out, it was for Frozen, and they had all the different Elsas, people that were singing the song, right? So like not an easy song to sing. They went and they grabbed that amazing lady off Broadway to be able to hit those notes, and then there's a version of that all around the world. They had somebody from Japan, somebody from Denmark, somebody, it's like 12 of them, and they were singing the song. But from a training perspective, certainly it's easier for us to adapt that content, leveraging animation, like you said, Jerry, not having to reshoot with characters that look a certain way, easily replaceable, as well as the narration. We can make sure we're having high-end, engaging voices that are going to tell that story.
Yeah, animation is a powerful tool. Absolutely, and Hollywood has made. I mean, Disney figured this out originally, right? And then into just ever expanding universe of global animations. Some of the that stuff. Some of the anime, even the shorts in the Academy Awards, the animated shorts are really, really cool. Very, very talented people doing that. And then the ninth one is looking at common themes. Slumdog is one, Titanic, Avatar, Spider-Man. It's themes of overcoming adversity or people, reaching their potential, or doing justice, or having courage, the good of the whole, those kinds of things. How do we tie learning to those themes? And this maybe gets at the Simon Sinek, thing of why. Start with the why. What are you really trying to communicate in this learning? Why would anyone care? How will you connect to them as human beings? And why should they give you their attention? So I'll throw that open for the group.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just tying into your company's overall like mission, vision or mission statement. I think is a big way for training to be able to tie back into it. Like Walmart wants to be able to sell products at a cheaper cost so people can live better, right? That's the focus. They're also really, really great at all the processes and shipping and all those kinds of things, but they all tie it back to that one theme, which is we want to make people's lives better by providing them access to products at a lower cost. So I think tying into your company's vision and mission is an easier way to get that common theme, because sometimes it can be hard. You're providing a finance course. What's the common theme there? How do you tie that back in?
Right. Yeah. How does that tie into courage? But you can tie those things into, we have obligations, right? And we want to be within the law. We want to do good things. We want to be part of a great company. We want to be part of doing really good things in the world. those things move people. Those things cause people to give their attention and to pay attention. And I think they're well worth thinking. Don't have to spend a huge amount of time on it, but thinking, how does this tie into the common themes of our quarter or our year or our vision or our mission, or even human themes well beyond those things? Aveen or Sarah, anything to add there?
Yeah, yeah, like you said, I think so. Like most of them, they're like common themes, like good of the whole, so those are things like everyone can relate to easily. So I think so. It just it's easy for people to understand it across different cultures.
Mm-hmm. And then let's move on to our final one. And this is the one that's really easy to do. Avoid offensive language and images. I'm fairly well convinced most of the time when somebody causes offense, it's not intentional. I think that most of the time they do it unintentionally. They do it because they don't understand a culture, or they've never really thought about it. So it's not that somebody's seeking to offend. It's that they inadvertently offend. And so you have to know cultures and audiences pretty well to know when you are and are not causing offense. Panelists, jump in on that.
To me, it can be something so inconceivable, and it's happened to me, where the use of a simple name, Scott, has an entirely, I wouldn't say explicit, but not so welcome meaning in other languages. So using that name in a
As a character or something.
or as a character, or in an e-learning video, is what I was going to say, as a person who's going to be an upstanding citizen, can have a completely different meaning if you're not careful with the intention of the word.
You're sure it's not Jerry? It's
I'm
Scott.
positive it's Scott.
Okay. How funny. That's a language issue, a cultural issue, Sarah, or both?
It's a language issue. It simply is a derogatory term.
Okay.
And it is not, it's not, when I mentioned that I knew someone that was named Scott and I was referring to them as Scott, the meaning got totally lost because it sounded like I was being offensive to that person.
Wow.
So it is important to know to essentially have that in-country review wherever possible to catch those types of issues.
Yeah,
And
especially.
And sorry, go ahead, Aveen.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I was going to say, to collaborate with an organization like Ingenuiti that is willing to coordinate those in-country reviews with you.
Oh,
Yeah,
fascinating.
definitely. Like clothes, like images of like, characters, the clothing they're wearing can definitely, affect the content. Some content might not, like, especially with movies, my censor board might cut some adult content in other countries, which may be okay in some other countries. So, you just have to keep that in mind while you're creating it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's quick questions. We'll just do a quick overview here of kind of what we've looked at. And again, if you have questions, please put them in. We want to encourage you to do the survey as well. So just the 10 lessons are, while any of you are thinking of any questions or comments you might have, be intentional, highlight diversity, include global scenery. Remember that colors and symbols differ by culture. Remember that clear language communicates very, very well. Simple messaging sticks. Look to prioritize your visuals. Look to animation when you need to. It's broadly appealing. Incorporate common themes, and avoid offense at all costs. It will stop anything you're trying to accomplish. It will end any objectives that you have. If people are offended, their ears and eyes are closed to you. So questions, anybody else, or any comments? Again, please put them in the question box, and if not, we will simply say thank you. Again, we'll be sending you an evaluation, and we'll be sending around a recording of this. We'll do a little bit of video cleanup, and we'll get it out to you. So thank you again for the gift of your time, everyone. And Adam and Aveen and Sarah, thank you for your time today.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all. It was fun.
All right.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.